Welcome to the Daily Insider here on VegasInsider.com. I am Kevin Rogers as we take you through the action on Wednesday, February 17, 2021. And a lot of action to catch you up on from last night and also look ahead to tonight. And first, we'll begin in the NBA. And the big news from last night, it was the Brooklyn Nets without Kyrie Irving, without Kevin Durant, and they find a way to beat the Phoenix Suns. And just a crazy second half for Brooklyn as we take a look at that score, 128-124. The Nets closed as 8-point underdogs on the road. James Harden was fantastic last night, hit a couple big shots down the stretch. But if you see that, the Phoenix Suns up by 21 at the half. They were up 24 in the second half. And Brooklyn scores 74 points in the second half to beat Phoenix. And a Suns team that had been pretty good defensively most of the season. And I know they gave up a lot of points to Milwaukee earlier on the homestand. They were 6-0 on the homestand before the loss to the Suns, or to the Nets rather, last night. But Brooklyn now 3-0 on their current road trip. They won at Golden State, they won at Sacramento, and now winning at Phoenix last night. Then they get the Lakers on Thursday and the Clippers coming up this weekend. So the Nets, they may not have their big three all the time, and people had questions about it, whether James Harden would fit in with KD and Kyrie. But Harden carried the load last night in a very big win for the Brooklyn Nets, beating the Phoenix Suns on the road as an 8-point underdog. When you look at the rest of the action from the NBA last night, the road teams were fantastic. They went 5-1. Lakers go to Minnesota, beat the Timberwolves. They win by 8. And that was a game that Minnesota hung around in. And the Lakers, who are still playing without Anthony Davis, they had another big game from LeBron. You know, what else is new? But the Lakers, who have been struggling against the spread, they get one at Minnesota after they lost to Denver back on Sunday night. And if you look back at what they did on the road on their last trip, they beat Atlanta back on February 1st, but then failed to cover in these 4 games here. Victory at Cleveland, a couple losses to the Sixers and Pistons, and they barely beat the Celtics. But a very big win for the Lakers last night. I know it doesn't sound big, beating Minnesota, but nice bounce back there. And now you have a 3-game homestand coming up with the Nets, the Heat, and the Wizards. And, I mean, you should beat the Heat and the Wizards. But as far as the Nets, that's a big game coming up tomorrow night. Now, let's go back to last night's game, or the rest of last night's action. And the only home team to win, the Boston Celtics, this was a nice victory last night as they knocked off the Nuggets 112-99. And the Celtics, who had been struggling of late, they covered as 2-point favorites. Nikola Jokic had a big game for the Nuggets, but Boston was up by double digits in the first half. Denver cut it close at the half, but then the Celtics opened it up in the second half, and they got the win. The Nuggets, meanwhile, they came off that Lakers victory on Sunday night, and they've not been good as an underdog, and they play with no rest at Washington tonight. We'll look ahead to that game in just a second. But New Orleans had a huge game from Zion, 144-113 win over Memphis. And the Pelicans with 43 points in the fourth quarter. I mean, look at those numbers in the last 3 quarters for New Orleans last night. 34, 38, and 43. And New Orleans was a team that really had struggled on the road. You see this, they lost their previous 3 games at Chicago, at Dallas, at Detroit. Beat Indiana by 1, and before that, Minnesota, a couple against Utah. They just weren't very good on the road of late, but big win for Stan Van Gundy's team last night. And how about this one with the Toronto Raptors, that they go into Milwaukee and they beat the Bucks. The Bucks were 6-point favorites off of a loss to Oklahoma City as an 11-point road favorite. That was after they had lost to Utah and Phoenix on this road trip. They come home, you'd figure, all right, they're going to beat the Raptors. And Toronto, with a really good effort there, as they outscored the Bucks by 11 in the second half after it was tied at the half. And Toronto, after losing to Minnesota a few nights ago at home, that's a really good win for them. And they lost to Milwaukee at home earlier in the season. So Raptors get a victory as a 6-point dog last night. And the Trailblazers, they go into Oklahoma City, build a 24-point lead on the Thunder. They end up trailing in the fourth quarter and then go on an 18-2 run down the stretch to beat the Thunder by 11. And Damian Lillard had a big game for the Blazers, but that was one that would have really hurt if you had the Trailblazers last night when they were in control of that game. And Oklahoma City had covered 4 straight going into that game. So the Blazers get that win. Now let's look ahead to tonight's action inside the NBA. And let's start at the top. Knicks and Magic. Orlando's a beat-up team. You see a lot of the money on the Knicks right now, laying 4.5 on the road, and Orlando coming off this West Coast swing in which the Magic lost 3 of 4. They won at Sacramento. That was without De'Aaron Fox in that game, and Marvin Bagley were both out for the Kings. But they lose at Portland. They cover in a loss at Golden State, and they get blown out by Phoenix, who was unrested. And now the Magic back at home, where they've struggled at home too, losing to the Kings, the Clippers, the Raptors. They beat Chicago there, but then got blown out by Chicago. And now they start a nice little homestand where they get the Knicks off of a victory against Atlanta a few nights ago. They got Golden State heading east and then 2 with Detroit. So the Magic, who are without Aaron Gordon, they're without Cole Anthony, they are really struggling from an injury standpoint. Denver heads to Washington, and Denver lost that game to Boston last night. You see another big public favorite here with the Nuggets. Look at all that money, or at least where the money's going. Definitely on the Denver Nuggets. And for Washington, they've suddenly won 2 straight, which is a lot for them. They beat the Celtics on Sunday by 13, and then they knocked off Houston Monday. So the final game of this homestand before heading west for 4 games. And very simply, Washington could lose all 4 of those games on the road. But at least the Wizards have been a little more competitive. They came back and won this Brooklyn game back at the end of January. I mean, it's not, we can't really say let's run to bet on the Wizards just because the Wizards have struggled a bit this season. But I don't know how easy it is just to take Denver in this game against Washington tonight. This one really intrigues me with Philadelphia and Houston, that the 76ers are back at home. They beat Sacramento to start the road trip. They lose at Portland, lose at Phoenix by 9 on Saturday, and then without Joel Embiid, they lose by 11 to Utah on Monday. And actually were up at the end of the first quarter in that game. I think they scored 42 in the first quarter. And then they fell apart because Joel Embiid didn't play, but they had good games from Tobias Harris, and Ben Simmons had 40 points in that game too. But the Jazz have been completely on fire. We'll talk about them in a second with their game against the Clippers. And Philadelphia now back at home to face Houston. And this is a Houston team that they've completely fallen apart of late by losing 6 in a row. Look at this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. San Antonio, Charlotte, New Orleans. These two, Charlotte and New Orleans, got blown out. The Heat lose by 7, and then you get run by the Knicks, and you lose to the Wizards. That one in John Wall's homecoming on Monday night. Now you get Philly, but you're getting double digits against the 76ers. Let's look back at that. The Rockets have not been an underdog of this price this season. And the biggest underdog spots, they were getting 7 at Dallas, 1, got 7 at San Antonio here and lost on the second end against the Spurs, but they won that first one. This was after the James Harden trade. They won at San Antonio, 7.5-point dogs. They covered at Portland. So in these big dog situations, they've actually been profitable. Now you're getting 10.5. Eric Gordon's a question mark tonight. So is Victor Oladipo. And the Rockets haven't played well of late, but also you get Philadelphia returning from a long road trip, so maybe the Rockets don't play as well. Atlanta and Boston, the Celtics on the second end of this back-to-back after beating Denver last night. Kemba Walker's not playing tonight. He's going to sit out due to rest. Now you say with the Celtics, I mean, you look, win-loss, 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 win-loss. This is a team that doesn't really... they haven't capitalized off a win a lot recently. Last time they won back-to-back games was here in late January against Cleveland and Chicago. So now you kind of wonder to get back-to-back with Atlanta before going on the road to get the Hawks 3 times here in the next week or so. But the Hawks are a team that they have kind of spun out of control of late after they haven't played well in a while, the Hawks. They beat Toronto here at home, but now 4 consecutive losses. They got blown out by San Antonio. They were down 30-something points going to the fourth quarter. They outscored the Spurs 42-17 or something ridiculous like that in the fourth quarter. Still lost by 11. Then lost this game to Indiana Saturday by 12. And then this game against the Knicks on Monday was really interesting because the Knicks were up big in the first half. Atlanta got up by 7 in the third, and then the Knicks went on this huge run and then ended up winning, but 123, 125, 125, 118, 121, 112, 122. I mean, Atlanta's not very good defensively. We see that. But you kind of wonder here if maybe the Hawks catch the Celtics with no rest and can beat them. And the money's going toward, Kemba's not playing, so that number dropped, but still. New Orleans and Portland, both these teams played last night. Both of them won on the road last night. Portland won at Oklahoma City, and the Pelicans beat the Grizzlies. So now you're getting the Pelicans as a home favorite, where they did beat Houston here about 8 days ago, but lost to Sacramento as a favorite, beat Washington, lost to Charlotte, lost to Oklahoma City, lost to Indiana, didn't cover against San Antonio. They have not been a good home favorite this year, New Orleans. And then Portland has come off a couple of nice wins on the road, and we'll see if they can keep that up as their short dog. Indiana and Minnesota from Target Center up in Minneapolis, and the Pacers off that overtime loss to Chicago ended a 2-game winning streak, but they've still lost 5 of 7. This Philadelphia game, they were up in the fourth quarter by 18 points and blew it. So the Pacers have not been very good. They're not covering either. And now you go to Minnesota to take on a Timberwolves team that, look at the record, 7-21. They hung with the Lakers last night, but they have a couple covers here and there. It's just hard to really make a case for the Timberwolves. Golden State and Miami and the Heat in this one, they come in losers of 2 straight on their current road trip after they lost to the Jazz and they got blown up by the Clippers a few nights ago without Kawhi, without Paul George. Golden State's been good at home. They're 10-6 at Chase Center, but also they've cleaned up against a lot of bad teams. They have beaten the Clippers and the Blazers at home, but they have 2 wins against Minnesota at home. They just beat Cleveland and Orlando and Detroit. So, look, they go as Steph Curry goes. And Steph's had some great games this season, but James Wiseman's out, and this Warrior team, they're up and down. The Heat have been a big disappointment, but you kind of wonder here getting them as a short dog after they just didn't play well against the Clippers. Probably it's a good opportunity to, to look at the Heat tonight. Now, this game is the showcase game with the Jazz and the Clippers meeting up at Staples Center, and Utah, they are 19-1 their last 20 games. 19-1, and they've covered 18 times in that span. You can say, here on our team page, they pushed against Detroit. Some places had a 12.5, so you can say either 18-1-1 or 18-2 against the spread. Still a fantastic job by Utah during the stretch. Mike Conley hasn't even really played for the Jazz, but they keep winning these games. They've won a lot of them by double digits. And now they get the Clippers, who, like I mentioned, they didn't have... Well, Paul George is out for a while, and Kawhi Leonard is nursing an injury. Who knows if he'll play tonight. Last time they played was back on January 1st in Salt Lake City, and the Clippers were a 3.5-point road favorite, and they lost that game 106-100. Now, Utah is flipped to a favorite that they are laying 3.5, 4, depending on where you look. And again, is that because Kawhi's going to come back tonight? Who knows? Mike Conley's still not going to play. what's interesting is in that last game, this 106-100 win by the Jazz, leading scorer for the Jazz that night was Mike Conley. Leading scorer for the Clippers was Paul George. Neither of them are playing tonight. So now, Jordan Clarkson had 40 points the other night against Philadelphia off the bench, and Donovan Mitchell should have another good game. But the Clippers got a nice win over the Heat here. Marcus Morris and Lou Williams and Serge Ibaka. I mean, the Clippers have players past, their top two. And Nicholas Batum is hurt. But you still need to have a guy like Kawhi. I mean, you're facing a team that's won 19 of 20. I mean, you can't really expect without Kawhi that you're going to be ultra successful. They'll be competitive, but Kawhi comes back, and that will be, needless to say, even though I'll say it, a big help. These two games are makeup games, but they're still on the board, so we'll talk about them. Chicago and Detroit. And Chicago, they're off this overtime win against Indiana back on Monday. They have not been good off a win. Look back at it since his 3-game winning streak in January. Lost to the Lakers at home by 11. Lost to the Knicks at home. Lost to the Wizards. Lost to the Clippers by 19. So the Bulls, and you see here, they were supposed to play Charlotte tonight, but because Charlotte had COVID issues, the Bulls didn't have an opponent. And Detroit was supposed to go to Dallas, but because of the terrible weather and the snowstorms and the cold in Dallas, they're not playing that game. So Detroit and Chicago now meeting up tonight because both teams were available and they haven't played each other yet this season. Remember, the NBA still has a second half schedule to make up. So you see here it cuts off at March 2nd. They still have to make the schedule for the second half. So obviously Detroit and Dallas will play again in the second half, and Detroit and Chicago won't play, well, they'll play one less matchup in the second half. So they just figured, let's play them now. Now, the Pistons have played better recently, beating New Orleans, beating Boston, beating Brooklyn. Those are good victories for the Pistons, but they still only have 2 road wins on the season. So it's not like this Piston team is, a bunch of world beaters, and Blake Griffin's not playing until they trade him. So, and Derrick Rose got traded to the Knicks. I mean, Jeremy Grant's played well. They have, some other help. I mean, it's just hard to really make a case for Detroit. I mean, Chicago's not great either, but it's hard to make a case for Detroit with, with their young team, lack of talent they have. Here's the Memphis Grizzlies. They get Oklahoma City tonight, and Memphis off this embarrassing 31-point loss to New Orleans last night. Gave up 144. I mean, my God. When you look at the games, now just a little point of reference. Look at the bad defensive games for Memphis and what happened the next game. Gave up 131 to San Antonio, then lost to Atlanta at home. Gave up 134 to Indiana, lost to Houston by 12 at home. Gave up 128, but then beat Charlotte, and they were down early in that game, and they came back and had a huge second half against the Hornets. So, again, you wonder, is this going to be another high-scoring game? Because Memphis isn't just going to fix the defense that quickly. And for Oklahoma City, they had covered 4 straight after, or you look here, took the Lakers to overtime twice, lost by 2 to Denver, upset Milwaukee, and then last night they were leading late in the fourth quarter until Portland went on a huge run. So they've still been pretty good against the spread, the Thunder, but now you look, they play without rest. They beat Minnesota without rest. They beat Portland without rest. They got blown out by the Lakers without rest. And they lost at home to Orlando without rest. So kind of up and down that scenario with the Oklahoma City Thunder. So that's the look at the NBA. Quickly, let's take a look at college basketball. And last night, in case you missed it, this one here in the SEC, I mean, Missouri, what's going on with them? Lose to Ole Miss, lose to Arkansas. You're up at the half against a terrible Georgia team, and then Georgia comes back and beats you. Good win for Tom Crean's Bulldogs. But you're Missouri. I don't know how you lose that game. UConn pulls away from Providence. That was a revenge spot for the Huskies as they beat the Friars. Rhode Island doesn't cover in this double overtime win against Dayton in the A-10. Michigan State loses again. Purdue pulls off the sweep of the Spartans there. Florida came back. Florida was down 10 at the half, and they led in the second half, but Arkansas ended up winning that game. Arkansas is now 7-0 in their last 7 SEC games because they I can't say they have a 7-game winning streak because they lost to Oklahoma State in the middle of all that. But Florida's first game back, I'm telling you, this trend of teams coming off COVID after a break, they do not fare well. And Florida had that. They had lost to South Carolina in their last game, and now they lose to Arkansas. Tulsa pulled away from Temple in that game. Well, I mean, Tulsa was up, and now, Temple made it kind of an interesting game towards the end, but Tulsa ended up covering, and Tulsa really had struggled the last few games. Nice win for St. John's at home against Xavier. That was a revenge game for them, and St. John's continues to play well. And Northwestern got the cover at Illinois, and Illinois beat them in Evanston earlier in the season, had that huge second half. Now this time Northwestern had a big second half after being down 12. So good win there for, good cover for Northwestern. Illinois got the win. I mean, Illinois, they've had some shakiness at times, even though they're going to be in the tournament, but they still have been up and down at times. Now let's look at tonight's board. And I talked about the coming off the rest, Louisville. They played on February 1st against Georgia Tech. That's the last game they played. And they've been off since. They get Syracuse now after 16 days off. And Syracuse has played 3 games in the same span that Louisville's been off in. They beat Boston College. They beat NC State. They lost at Clemson. So Syracuse now, this stretch here, to try to help themselves get in the tournament, it looks tough. Louisville's going to be a tough game. But Notre Dame at home, Duke, who has been down, Georgia Tech's actually been tough, and North Carolina, who's been down more than up this year. So big stretch for Syracuse over the next 5 games. This Butler-Marquette game in the Big East, Marquette beat Butler last time they played, but Marquette didn't cover. Butler had a huge run at the end of that game to get the cover, but Marquette has not been good as a road dog. Lost at UCLA. They beat Creighton, but lost at Xavier. They lost at Providence, got blown out of Villanova, barely covered against Seton Hall. I mean, they haven't won a lot of these games outright, I should say, because they got the cover against Seton Hall. And this was the game they were laying 3.5 against Butler. And when you look at the Bulldogs, they have not really been anything that special this season. Beat DePaul. I mean, that was a good win against St. John's, but they lose by 15 to Georgetown on Saturday. And you see this little stretch here that they really haven't been that great. Double-digit loss to UConn, double-digit loss at home to Xavier, double-digit loss to Georgetown. So Butler laying 2 in that one. You have VCU and Richmond inside the Atlantic 10. And VCU, they have played well of late. They beat St. Bonaventure, one of the top teams this year in the A10, and beating Dayton there. So that's a good job for VCU. And take a quick look at Richmond. Richmond. They, January, a little bit of ups and downs. St. Bonaventure, they lost to LaSalle, terrible loss. They beat St. Joe's, and that St. Louis game that got postponed at the last minute. But Richmond's still a pretty good team. Kentucky and Vandy inside the SEC. Kentucky was laying 11.5 last time they played Vanderbilt. And they won 77-74 back on January 5th. And you see Kentucky here barely beat Auburn. Look at that. ATS loss. Win against LSU. Loss. Look at that. I mean, look at John Calipari's team. How much they've struggled. And they hung in the Missouri game. They lost by 1 at home to Arkansas. Played really well. You got Tennessee on deck. And Vandy, the one thing I'll give Vandy, they've been the worst team in the SEC for a long time in everything. Well, football and basketball, the 2 main sports. But look at this. Look at that run. 4-0-1 against the spread. Beat Mississippi State by 21 on the road. Hung with Georgia. Beat South Carolina at home. Hung with Florida. It's not too bad. And pushed against Auburn. They get Alabama next. What's Alabama going to be laying that game? 12, 14? So USC and Arizona State in the Pac-12. Arizona State has struggled against the spread this year. They had a lot of games postponed due to COVID, but they've won a couple. They beat Oregon State, didn't cover. Beat Stanford and Cal at home. Lost to Oregon. Oregon's obviously a top team in the Pac-12. Now you go to UCLA or USC and UCLA the next few games. So, I mean, they should win these two against the Washington schools. But on the road, lost by 13 at Arizona, lost by 1 at Oregon State as a favorite. So, Arizona State really has been nothing special. And USC 16-3. They're laying 10 tonight. A lot to lay. I mean, I stay away from that game. KU and K-State, the Sunflower Showdown. I think that's what they still call it. Kansas, they played a little bit better because they had their struggles earlier in the season. You see all these losses here. But beating Oklahoma State at home, they dominated Iowa State. They got them twice. Whatever. Wins are wins. I know Iowa State's at the bottom of the Big 12. Bill Self's team needs wins. And now look at what you got coming up after K-State. Texas Tech, at Texas, and then Baylor. I mean, look at that gauntlet they have at the end. I mean, lost by 8 to Baylor earlier. They know they got blown out by Texas at home. And they beat Texas Tech on the road early in, I think it was the first conference game. So that'll be interesting. And K-State got blown out last time they played KU. And K-State right now, they are, look at that. Look at all these losses. Last time they won was against Nebraska Omaha on December 29th. They haven't won a game in 2021 yet, K-State. So, I mean, they were competitive against Oklahoma State. They covered against Texas Tech. They have a couple covers as big dogs. And against Texas, too, they covered. So, K-State's been better against the spread. They're still lousy. And you got Duke and Wake tonight. We'll see what Duke does against Wake Forest after beating NC State. Wake's actually been a pretty good ATS team of late. When you look at what they've done, they covered against FSU. They covered against BC. They covered, look at all these covers against Miami, NC State, Pitt, UNC, Virginia Tech. It's pretty good. Pretty good run there for Wake Forest, but we'll see what they do this time against the Dukies, against Coach Krzyzewski. And Minnesota, Indiana, we'll wrap up the college basketball look with that. Indiana, they've had some ups and downs recently, lost by 19 at Ohio State. At home, they've been a dog the last few times, beating Iowa, losing to Illinois. I mean, you got some good teams there you've been facing. And losing to Rutgers, losing to Purdue. Now, you're laying points against Minnesota. But Minnesota, look at this number, 0-7 on the road for Richard Pitino. Losing to Maryland, losing to Rutgers, losing to Purdue, Iowa, Michigan. I mean, the one thing I'll give Pitino, Wisconsin, Michigan, Iowa, Purdue, Rutgers, Maryland. That's rough, man. They're not losing to Northwestern on the road. No disrespect, Northwestern. But they're not losing to Northwestern or Nebraska or even Michigan State on the road. I mean, they're losing to all the top teams in the league on the road. So I'm not going to exactly get on them for that. So that's the look at the action in college basketball. Want to give you a look at this as well from our friend Matt Blunt, who does a great job. He covers everything. He covers the NFL. He covers NHL, too. If you want some NHL free picks, you could find his free picks. We'll go to that really quick, and we'll go back to the golf. You go to the NHL arena here at VegasInsider.com, and here are Matt Blunt's free picks. He likes Chicago tonight against Detroit, and he likes Edmonton against Winnipeg. So those are a couple of the free picks. You could read up on it on our NHL arena as the Blackhawks have played a little bit better. Now let's go back to his golf. The Genesis. Good music group. Genesis Invitational out in California, the Pacific Palisades. My second home. That is coming up tomorrow. And Dustin Johnson's the favorite. You see here John Rahm, Justin Thomas, Rory McIlroy. You see Bryson DeChambeau there at 17-1 to win this tournament. So here's what he likes. Could you consider backing Justin Thomas 14-1? Mid-range, Hideki Matsuyama, 45-1, and Keegan Bradley, the long shot, big long shot. And then here, 72-hole matchup, John Rahm over Patrick Cantlay. So you could take a look at this article. You could read up on it. Matt Blunt, the Genesis. And coming up, we'll look at it later in the week. We have the second race for NASCAR. They're at the road course at Daytona this week, the one that Chase Elliott always dominates. And we'll look at those top 5 picks later in the week for Micah Roberts. And Mike is going to have those picks out. And obviously Chase Elliott's going to be one of the top choices just because he has dominated at these road courses. He won there at Daytona last year. So that's the look there. And obviously, as you scroll down our page, you can find some of these college basketball previews. Our man Tom Cunningham, he has spearheaded a lot of this. So you can see some of these games we talked about: Richmond VCU, Arizona State USC, Utah State Boise State in the Mountain West, Minnesota Indiana, and also Jazz Clippers, the showcase game in the NBA tonight. You can take a look at that. And we also got a lot of other great things. So check it out at VegasInsider.com. And the Daily Insider, which we'll have for you every afternoon from Monday to Friday. And very excited that you've been able to tune in. You can also find the Bet and Collect podcast at VegasInsider.com. And we'll have new episodes every day. And also check out our YouTube channel, as we have the live stream, but also we have the videos, NBA and college basketball free picks that we're giving out. We have one for Jazz Clippers you could find, and Jazz Favorites Night at LA. So a very loaded live stream today with all the things that were going on, and we appreciate you watching. You could find me on Twitter, my Twitter handle, VI Rogers. And you can also follow our Twitter as well, TwitVI. So you can give us a follow there. We appreciate it. Thank you so much. And we will talk to you again on Thursday right here on VegasInsider.com.